Hello, let's continue on with the nervous impulse, which is the way the electrical signal is sent down the nerve. So we are going to work through a video called The Nerve Impulse by Healthcare, and it's a great little video. So let's look at it. This one's taken from another textbook, but sadly that's what happens with YouTube. Something's taken and given to something else. This one is with the used to be with the high school, or is with what used to be the high school textbook. Anyway, so this is the nerve impulse.
Is an electrical current that travels along dendrites or axons due to ions moving through voltage-gated channels in the neuron's plasma membrane.
Okay, that's the introduction. So when we look at it, what I want us to pay attention to is the fact that you have something called a resting potential, which sets up the ions in certain area. And the ions we're looking at is sodium, which is Na+, that's sodium, and K+, which is potassium. So we're going to pump ions into a certain situation, and that is resting potential. Phase 1 is resting potential. So let's go back and look at resting potential again.
Voltage-gated channels open and close in response to an electrical voltage, so they are affected by changes in electrical charge around them. When a neuron is at rest, a charge difference is maintained between the inside and outside of the cell. This charge difference is produced and maintained largely by active transport using sodium-potassium pumps. The pumps send sodium ions out of the cell and bring potassium ions in, while other channels allow some flow of potassium ions back out of the cell. The sodium ions cannot easily get back in to replace the lost positive charges.
Okay, let's look at what's going on here. There is a pumping, and 3 of the purple sodiums get pumped out for every 2 potassiums that come in. So as a result, you end up with a large concentration of sodium outside the neuron and a large concentration of potassium inside. Sodium outside, potassium inside. It's very important you realize that, because that sets up the resting potential, or the starting part. Then also, because 3 sodium are pumped out for every 2 that come in, you end up with more positive outside, which means that relatively there is more negative inside.
The overall result is that the exterior of the cell has a net positive charge and the interior has a net negative charge.
Now, because there is a positive end and a negative, or a positive side and a negative side, this cell is called polarized.
The difference in charge between the interior and exterior of the cell is called the resting membrane potential. A nerve impulse begins when a stimulus disturbs the plasma membrane on a dendrite, causing sodium channels to open.
Okay. The action potential, or the passing on of the information, starts when there is a disturbance. Now, the disturbance we're going to look at controls the sodium channels and the potassium channels. So let's go back to the note sheet. We are going to look at defining the action potential, defining threshold, and then we're going to look at the ion changes, which is the movement of sodium and potassium in a situation called depolarization and repolarization. So that's what we're going to look at. Back to the video.
Ions flow into the cell, lessening the charge difference at that location. If the change is enough, it will cause nearby voltage-gated sodium channels to open. This allows so many sodium ions to flood into the cell at that location that the membrane there is depolarized.
Okay, so threshold is when there is enough charge difference that it opens the sodium gates. These are the sodium gates, these purple blobs. When you open the sodium gates, the sodium will now move in. It was negative inside. If you move positive into a negative space, it is no longer negative, or D means not. So it's not negative, so it is depolarized.
with the local region inside the cell having a net positive charge and the outside of the cell having a net negative charge.
Okay, so once the sodiums move in, you end up with the inside being positive, which is depolarization.
This affects neighboring voltage-gated sodium channels, which then open, moving the depolarization along the membrane. This moving depolarization is called an action potential.
So the action potential is the movement of the polarization or the depolarization along the axon.
Changes occur behind the action potential to restore the resting membrane potential. The voltage-gated sodium channels close and voltage-gated potassium channels open. This allows a rapid flow of potassium ions out of the cell, repolarizing the membrane so that the inside is again negative and the outside positive.
Okay, so the second phase, repolarization, is when the sodium channels are closed, but now we're opening potassium channels. And potassium moves from inside to the outside. And by moving a positive outside, it makes the inside negative again. So that's why it's called repolarization.
Followed by use of sodium-potassium pumps to fully restore the resting membrane potential and to reestablish proper concentrations of sodium and potassium ions inside and outside the cell.
Okay, so there is a time where the ions move. Now, it takes a while for this to reset because it can't go off again until the ions have replaced themselves or got back into the original spot. And that is called the refractory period, or the time where things cannot happen, the refractory period. Okay, so that is a very good, very fast summary, but enough for this course. So if we look at it, there are some things I want you to be aware of. We are looking at the ion changes. So the main activities that maintain resting potential is the pumping of the sodium and potassium in using the ATP potassium sodium pump. Then we will find that once the resting potential is set up, the sodium, the Na, is in a higher concentration outside the neuron, and the potassium is a higher concentration inside the neuron. Then along will come an action potential, which is the stimulus, which passes down the neuron. If it reaches threshold, which is a certain level to get it started, then there will be the changes or movement of the ions. And this starts with the opening of the sodium gates. The sodium gates open and sodium moves in, causing depolarization. Once that change depolarizes to a certain amount, that will cause the sodium gates to close, the potassium gates to open, and the potassium will then move out, repolarizing the neuron. Then it takes a while for everything to set and reset and recover, and that is called the refractory period. Good. A lot information there. Go through it again if you have to, and then there's a little check your understanding quiz. Take care.